So I was very honored to meet Inspectorio really at the kind of acceleration phase. They were part of one of the inaugural classes at Target Techstars in Minneapolis and was very impressed with the technology. And so I've known David literally since day zero. He recently spoke at the AFA, their leadership summit down in Washington, D.C. And he talked about this idea of pre-competitive, and we approached him there about this opportunity to do a webinar because I felt that they were, Inspectorio as a whole really understood retail in a way that I haven't necessarily heard, kind of from other technology providers, and also how to kind of get everyone to work together. And I thought it was really interesting. So I'll let David tell you a little bit more about himself and about Inspectorio. In terms of the call, please ask me questions. There's a Q&A function on the bottom of your screen during the call when we have kind of formal Q&A, and I'll weave those in. Secondly, we'll have a video up in 24 hours. We'll have a transcript up in 48 hours of this. And then, kind of any other questions, or if you need help along the way, once again, you can just chat me directly and we'll take care of it. So with that, David, I'll turn it over to you to talk about Inspectorio yourself, and then we'll kind of get into the formal Q&A.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Deborah. Thanks for the introduction. Hello, everybody. My name is David Klein. I'm the co-founder and president of Inspectorio. What does it mean to be president of Inspectorio? I manage product. We are a product company, a technology company. And so the definition of the vision and executing on that vision from a product perspective, that's under my responsibility. And of course, also external relations. Specifically about who we are, those that have not heard about us. So we are a digital platform for quality control and compliance monitoring. The secret sauce, as I'd like to say, is from the very beginning, we've built a platform with the vision of how can we best leverage data, taking into account that our industry, right, apparel, hard goods, has a very large interconnected supply chain. And recognizing that data today is operating in silos, there's very little automation. So we've built a platform that not only digitizes all of the process of quality control and compliance monitoring, but also then automates, optimizes using machine learning, and ultimately brings powerful insights that members of the industry can benefit from and make smarter decisions moving forward.
Great. So David, I really enjoyed some of our opportunity to chat ahead of this call today. And you said some things that I think are really helpful in this environment. And maybe you can talk a little bit about, these stages of catastrophes and frameworks that you've worked on in your kind of prior life, and maybe just help us set the stage for the audience here.
Yeah, thank you, Deborah. So, I think that in difficult moments, it's in difficult moments that companies build their reputations. And, in the last 10 years, we've been hearing a lot about these focus on sustainability, focus on partnerships, focusing on empowerment. And this has been cascaded down throughout the supply chain. And what has been built or preached upon for the last 10 years, it's something that it could be destroyed in a matter of weeks. And I think that it's in moments like this that it's important that companies act in line with the message that they've been having in the past and the reinforcement that has been built during all of these years. So, getting more into, all right, now what's next, or how do I operate? What's an interesting framework or guideline trying to think of the future and how my company, being a brand or retailer, how am I going to adapt? I like to use that framework, as you very well mentioned, of my previous life. So I worked in the United Nations for several years before starting Inspectorio, and particularly UNDP. So we focus on what we call the early recovery stage of development. And development has three stages post-catastrophes. One is the emergency stage. So if you think of a country that has gone through an earthquake, the focus during that emergency stage is how do we get people to safety and focus on minimizing the impact, which is saving lives or causing less deaths, right? So it's water, sanitation, protection, shelter. Then comes early recovery, right? When we start thinking, once people start going back into the neighborhoods, from the camps back into neighborhoods, what are these new realities that need to be taken into consideration? And having that conversation early has proven to be effective. what I've seen in our current reality today is that that framework is very relevant, right? Right now, stores are being closed, or at least some convenience stores are open. People are spending less. That has, had a massive impact economically, and companies are in a stage of emergency. And after emergency comes a stage of early recovery, right? And I think that the way in which companies act in the stage of emergency and how quick they start identifying the need to adapt to this new reality, right? How are we gonna work once stores start opening? What is this new reality that our team needs to adapt to is very important. And the earlier you have those conversations and the earlier you set those foundations, the better you're going to be at minimizing the impacts and be in a position of being more successful in this new reality.
Great. I think we're just going to go ahead and launch some poll questions so that we can weave those into some of the questions for David. But David, I think right now, I mean, there's so much that I want to ask you, and I know our time is limited, but, having my own background in supply chain and understanding the challenges that retailers are facing right now, and we've talked a lot about digitalization and digitization. What do you see in this environment? What's most important from a supply chain perspective? And where does this whole kind of digitization roadmap fit into this?
Yeah. So I want to answer that also in terms of stages, right? The same stages of recovery. So I think that in the emergency stage that many companies are under now, it's really important to communicate effectively, right? The nature of our industry is one where it's a pipeline. Consumers go into the stores, depending on how they buy, it regulates inventory, you have shipments coming in the sea. And whenever this stops, it's like you put a hole on the pipe and then everything stops, right? And so before decisions are being made, it's important that you do involve those suppliers and those factories in that decision-making process, because again, you've built these relationships for a very long time, and it's not a question of simply alerting them and causing panic, but more than anything, making them ready to understand the challenges. And there's important commitments, right? There's an important rhetoric that has been maintained before. So engaging and communicating effectively externally. Now, internally, also within the emergency phase, it's important that teams understand that what are the ways in which we're going to be operating in this new reality, right? And that reality is one that during the emergency stage is very unique, but start talking early now about what are we going to do once the stores start opening, right? That recovery stage. And also recognize that there's going to be a new normal. And what is that new normal? It's a normal that, this recovery that, experts say 12 to 18 months, digitization is going to be ever more relevant, right? There's been a lot of initiatives in the past, but the reality today is that that needs to be accelerated. And we're seeing many companies accelerate that. People are not going to be buying the same way. Sales are going to be affected. People are going to be buying virtually. People are going to be buying based on convenience, also based on price. And if we look at, outside of supply chain, remote work, schools are being done digitally. I think for supply chain in particular, that reality that companies need to adapt to in the next 12 to 18 months as part of the recovery stage is one where in supply chain, we see a lot of, the relevance of virtual sampling for sure. And the second one is remote sustainability verification, or, remote audit and remote quality inspections. I think those two aspects of digitization are going to be ever more important in this new reality.
So David, the audience may or may not know, but with you physically being based in Vietnam right now, what are you seeing in terms of, the kind of being the hub of real sourcing, and some of the changes we've seen in sourcing over the past, let's call it 12 to 18 months. And are you seeing that anyone who kind of diversified their supply chains out of China, are they rethinking those decisions? I mean, there's a lot to kind of unpack here, but where are we in all of that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that the tariff conversation in the past definitely became a catalyst for brands and retailers to start thinking of diversification. I think that now with the current crises, Companies are considering diversification, and sometimes even, to our earlier conversation, even thinking about outsourcing. But I think that, again, there's been so much invested in these relationships for such a long time that it has taken efforts to build these relationships, that there's short-term actions and long-term actions. And one needs to be extremely careful that in these short-term actions that are going to be driven to minimize, to have a maximization of cost benefit, right? It might work in the short term. So yes, I'm going to outsource my workers, or yes, I'm going to diversify. Those are short-term, at least for the outsourcing piece, it's a lot of short-term decisions that, yes, in your 2021 financials and your 2022 financials are going to show as effective, but think of the long term. And again, I'll rephrase what I said at the beginning, that, it's in moments of crisis that companies build their reputation. So think long term. In terms of diversification, I think that it will happen, and we are seeing many companies do that. However, with that also comes risk, right? Risk of quality, risk of sustainability. And as companies have to increase the level of oversight to minimize quality risk and minimize sustainability risk, at the same time, they have to reduce costs. So again, how am I gonna increase my oversight to mitigate risks of quality and sustainability at the same time that I reduce costs? And that's when technology comes in, right? That's when you start realizing that in this new reality, technology is important. We need to digitize. There's no other way to do this.
Well, I think it's this whole idea right now, right? It's in some cases, sure, it's survival of the fittest, but almost survival of the savviest. What are you seeing your savvy clients do differently to kind of get them through this, challenging time?
Yeah, so I think what we are seeing is the companies that have started previously to have a important digitization discussion internally and go through a digitization process, they are better prepared to minimize the impacts right now under the emergency phase, and more importantly, during the recovery and long term. Why? Because you need to make decisions quickly, and you can only make decisions quickly when you have data. You can only get data quickly when you have digitize multiple aspects of your supply chain in a way that it also involves suppliers and factories, right? There's been many initiatives of digitization, but that have still been just that, digitization, and still in silos. So I think that companies that have done that in the past are clearly going to be, in a better position today, and are, as a fact, in a better position today. Companies that start their conversations early today with their internal teams, with leadership, about the importance of kind of syncing to this new reality where things are going to be done remotely, where the patterns of sales and purchasing are going to be different, and the importance and the role that technology plays in that are the ones that are going to be able to make that switch, adapt to this new reality within the next 12 to 18 months and be placed in a better position. It's a question of making those decisions and then taking a stance and adapting to that new reality. Companies that have had digitization has allowed them to empower their vendors, right? To leverage that strategic relationship, to honor those commitments, right? I love what H&M has done, which is to say, to our Bangladesh partners, we're going to buy all of our orders that we've placed, and we'll figure out later how we're gonna be selling them moving forward. Now that's living your commitments and standing upon your commitments, right? So I think acting quickly, recognizing the importance of digitization, and those that have digitized will just continue on that path, and adapting to this new reality is really what's making the biggest impact.
It's interesting because we've seen I would say even in the past 2 weeks, a significant uptick, right? If you think about the time frame we're in, right, it's really starting to place orders for holiday. And a lot of these processes are already, and yes, Christmas does come every year. Despite the challenges we feel right now, we will recover, as kind of David walked through this framework. But the whole design process is changing. So this idea of 3D design, more, kind of digitization. How are you seeing, and also too, a question that I think you're very, really an expert to ask, is as we're seeing more 3D design, how does that impact the relationships with the factories? Just like, how does it work?
Yeah, so a couple of things, and I think this is where I will bring back this conversation of pre-competitive collaboration is, We have in our industry one of the most interconnected relationships amongst all of the different players of that industry. Factories are being shared. There's a massive overlap amongst leading brands and retailers. And as you start going through this process of defining what the new digitization journey is going to be like, if you don't take that into consideration, that there is this interconnectedness, you're never going to be able to evolve with your strategic partners, that is your factories and your vendors, in a way where you have that centralized source of truth. Because if you don't take that into consideration, that interconnectedness, number one, you're still going to be operating in silos and expectations are not met. And that's why I started talking about the importance of communication, of seeing the same information, of having a central place for everybody to see the data, in the same way to make decisions together. And when you have multiple brands and retailers that, have this interconnectedness, events like this are ones that are further reinforcing that we have common problems. And in order to fix those common problems, if more effectively, means working together on them. And so my only ask is, recognizing that in the past, important transformations might have taken 5 years. Today, these transformations are having to happen in 5 weeks. And as you take those decisions, ask yourself the right questions, right? What am I digitizing for? Am I digitizing for the sake of digitization, or am I digitizing for having greater actionable data to be able to communicate with my partners, factories, and vendors better? Will I be able to automate? Will I be able to be more preventative? And more importantly, will I be able to solve industry problems with the industry together, right? How can we leverage machine learning to understand common patterns of risk across the industry? And the technologies are there, right? It's a question of having the will. And of course, it's the question of asking the right questions. And one last thing, Deborah, I think I read this quote that I really, really liked. That I think is very relevant for now, which is that, when fishermen can't go fish, right? When you're in this moment of emergency and you're trying to think how the new operating model is going to be like, what they do is they sow the new nets. And, for our industry today, they need to start thinking about what are these new nets that we need to start building to go out and fish. And these nets need to be built in every aspect of the supply chain.
Yeah, I mean, things are changing very rapidly, and one question that we often get is on blockchain and how does that drive the digitization of the supply chain? What are you seeing from that perspective? Are we still, like, what inning are we in with that? And how many retailers and vendors are asking you about that question?
Yeah, so blockchain, actually, I think we're still very early, right? There's been incredible ideas about technology that they can only take traction if they're happening at the right time and if they come with the right, value proposition built in. I think blockchain is extremely powerful, and I think it will be part of our new normal moving forward. I think in our industry, people are still trying to understand what machine learning is and what AI is. And I think that from there, we can start discussing about how to leverage other important digitization initiatives that provide more traceability. And I think that's where blockchain is going to be extremely important, right? When, for the companies that have had a strong investment and stance on sustainability in the past are going to continue building on sustainability today. Those that have not, will start focusing on sustainability today. So those that have, I think traceability is becoming more and more relevant. And that's where blockchain comes into play. But we have not been approached that often or that regularly, no.
Well, it's interesting because I couldn't agree with you more on this whole supply chain, right? I mean, are we using organic cotton or not? And from a traceability perspective, I mean, I think we're still early on in this kind of blockchain solution and conversation. But as the role, so we believe that the 2020 would be the year of the kind of chief sustainability officer, and we started to see that kind of in the back half of 19. And it's interesting because where sustainability can also assist with, let's just say, greater top line and bottom line, right? There is an opportunity there. We're still seeing, even in this environment, a continued focus on it. There's like recycling tech and a lot of other interesting aspects of sustainability. What are you seeing now that we're kind of, we're almost at April 1st and we've had an unusual year? What aspects of sustainability are people still very focused on right now?
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right. I think that two things. One is that, companies that have not yet invested in sustainability, if they do, they're not going to invest in sustainability for the sustainability sake, but they're going to do it for more bottom line or top line sake. And those that have invested heavily and built the foundations on sustainability, they will continue to do it now. Those that have not, I don't see that happening. And I see it in a couple of aspects, right? So number one is you are needing, so if we think of technology and digitization in any aspect, but in this case in sustainability, I will continue to reinforce my point of being at a journey. And what many companies are recognizing is they need to have visibility into their production. In order to do that, right, what are my social standards? What are my environmental standards? You need to capture the data. You need to capture it in a way that is quick, that is actionable. So we are seeing that as becoming, almost, across the board. But then from there, what the industry is struggling is there are so many standards out there that how do we make those standards relevant to each of the company's own code of conducts? Yeah. And people have attempted to do that manually, right? This issue that I'm finding maps to this question, but if you have multiple questions, I think it's very hard. So that's where also technology is playing an important role, and we've helped accelerate and facilitate that, which is, again, the importance of having a central tool to gather all of these, assessments of sustainability, social standards, environmental standards, centralizing, making that data relevant to each company's own code of conduct, and then driving continuous improvement, right? If you cannot make the data relevant, then you cannot drive improvements. And, that's where also pre-competitive collaboration comes in, where there are so many multiple standards that, again, with this new reality, standards completions, right? If factories and vendors need to do multiple standards, it takes time, it costs money, and it's not actionable. So what I do foresee happening is, again, the industry coming together and recognizing that, let's stop this overlap of assessments and work on assessments that we know that work, that are effective, that are efficient, and that benefits factories, vendors, as much as brands and retailers.
Yeah, you bring up this idea of data, but for any of us who've worked in supply chain, we know that a lot of data is still on paper, right? I mean, I would go into factories and I'd be given like a little, kind of scrap of paper or faxes.
70%.
Yeah, it's actually higher than I would have even thought. So yes, data is great, but how do we, if from an ML or AI perspective, how do we approach that when we're still dealing on scraps of paper?
Exactly. So again, it's a journey, right? And companies that have started through that digitization journey 3 years ago are at a place today. And, there are leading brands and retailers today that have digitized all of their activities. Then they start understanding patterns, right? Where are manual added activities that are now less relevant? And I can start focusing on value added activities, right? So digitization, which is replacing pen and paper to digital, is the first stage. Right? That's the easy piece. And you can do that. There's thousands of ways that you can do that in solutions out there, right? Then it's how do we make the, right? But then it's how do we make the data relevant, right? Because if I catch the data, why is it relevant, right? A good example is your Apple Watch, right? Your Apple Watch doesn't just tell you how many steps you walked, but it also tells you based on your heart rate and your weight and your height, that you should be walking more or less, right? What your threshold is and what your goals should be, and why you should be doing more or less. So how do we make the data relevant? Then, now more relevant than ever is this importance of, how do I start reducing cost? And for that, you need automation. And so again, paper to digital, making the data relevant, bringing very powerful automation. So you remove manual added activities and you focus on value added activities. And then it's when machine learning comes in, which is once I have all of these activities in place, I have automation at my core, I can start understanding where are my high risk areas and my low risk areas. And through that automation say, okay, if it's high risk, then I need to go in and inspect, or I need to go in and assess. If it's low risk, then I'm not going to do it, or I'm going to do a self-inspection. And on top of that, if you do go, once you look at the data and the patterns, you understand where are the high risk areas there, then in that assessment or in that inspection itself, what should I be checking for, right? And that's what helps you be more preventative, but more importantly, also allows you to put your resources where it matters most, right? Only on those high risk areas. So if you think about it, right, the future is going to be one of remote work. You need visibility, you need data quickly, you need to reduce costs, and you need to be preventative. A digitization goal that can do all of that is what's going to make the companies survive and be more effective in these impacts, with these impacts.
We've been getting a lot of questions, right? A lot of retailers have enacted like force majeure and are canceling orders, trying to work with factories and, you know, kind of third parties. So I have a few questions around this. Number one, what do you see as like best practices, and from like a sustainability perspective, what's going to happen with all this product that's, you know, kind of already in place? And then number two, are we seeing, you know, kind of this, you know, we've all been hunting for the best talent, and it's really kind of been a war for talent. There's a lot of talent available right now, but also too, as everyone's trying to kind of bring down their fixed costs and move to more variable, do you think we start to go to this like age of outsourcing? I feel like, you know, in addition to us all figuring out how to work from home, as I'm like sitting in a closet, but you know, there's a lot that we're learning, but also we need to figure out, right, this new kind of this new reality, and what does that look like from your perspective?
Yeah, I can't stress enough, Deborah, that, you know, always when there is a crisis, people are cost sensitive. And people will do what brings in the highest cost benefit, right? And companies have invested decades in creating systems, processes, relationships that today are going to be, you know, a test. And if you do have a short-term view, sure, you're going to do outsourcing, right? But in the large scale of things, this is a punch. It's a punch that will last 12 months to 18 months. So the companies that maintain their core fundamentals intact will be victorious. Focusing on short term will help your financial goals of 2021, will help your financial goals of 2022, but long term will not be the same for your strategic relationships and your sustainable supply chains.
So the, you know, as we think about the, you know, kind of the future supply chain, I mean, I've gotten up and spoken about this and thought a lot about it, but I feel that, you know, this punch, if you will, right, it's changing how we think of the future of supply chain. And right, we've also, I think, figured out we're much more reliant on certain geographies in terms of inputs. Even if we moved our, you know, kind of output to other geographies, we're seeing so much change so quickly. What does the, and I know it's a tough question, but what do you think the future of supply chain looks like now?
Yeah, good question. So a couple of things. I think that the same way that we're looking at our daily lives and how we operate with our teams, where things need to be done remotely, when education needs to be done remotely, where spending patterns are going to be focused, you know, more on convenience. I think that in supply chain, I do see that there is going to be an ever more importance being placed on how can we digitize multiple aspects of the supply chain, particularly virtual sampling. And then second, as I mentioned, self-inspections and self-verifications, right? We're gonna have to empower vendors and factories to do that better. And to do that in the way that also you're mitigating potential risks of the quality of the data that you're gathering, right? Because if, you know, there's that fear of, if I trust suppliers and factories to do self-assessments, right, in any aspect of your verifications or any aspect of your inspections, you need to make sure that the data is trusted, right? So that's something that that I see happening already, right? You know, particularly in our case, we've had an increase, an upsurge of usage that's been exponential because of companies putting a lot more focus on empowering their vendors to do this. And again, it also needs to be considered in this new reality where people are going to be able to move less. Inspectors, auditors that are doing the sustainability assessments, that are doing inspections cannot go in because of fear of contagion. There's limitations to travel. So I think just a culture of self-assessment is going to be very, very powerful and ever more relevant. And again, digital and virtual sampling, and making sure that you bring your factories, your suppliers, and yourself into having a common understanding of where you stand, so that if this happens again, everybody knows what the impact is going to be, and you make decisions together instead of in silos, for sure.
Well, it's interesting from the poll in terms of new technologies, approaches, are you embracing to adapt to this new reality? Really real-time production monitoring, over almost 60% of respondents, that was, kind of what's really key. And I think you really hit on that. I want to, we have several questions, and in the interest of time, I want to, if anyone has a question, please chat using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and I'll go through some of the ones that have already come in, David. So you stated that there are 3 development stages. I heard first and second. Can you please revisit the third?
Yeah, so the first is the emergency stage. Second is the early recovery, right? And in our case, it's 12 to 18 months. And then the third one is, in the development world, it's called long-term development. In our case, I can call it, the long-term reality, which is, you have your emergency, you have your recovery, and then it's just adapting to the new normal. And how effective you're going to be in that new normal depends on how effective you've been in your early recovery, because that early recovery is what sets the foundation. And how effective you're going to recover early is how quickly you can take a stance, you can make a decision, you can ask the right questions, and you can align your team on adapting to this new operating model, right? Where again, as we view it, is a digital one.
All right, what is a realistic timeline to employ a blockchain solution to the digitization of the supply chain?
Yeah, so it's very funny because we've lived digitization efforts in companies that have done it in a year, and we have seen it also from companies that has taken them 2 to 3 years for the first stage, which is passing, from manual to digital, because remember that it's a journey, right? So it really depends on the vision of the leadership and the buy-in that the leadership has. What is important also is that leadership also explains internally at the company that digitization is a journey, and that you set the expectations clearly, because if people think that this is something that can be done from one day to the next, and those expectations are not met, then it's going to delegitimize the initiative, right? So my recommendation to leaders is recognize that digitization is a new reality, understand it as a journey, align expectations internally, and then drive the buy-in to be able to move across those stages as fast as possible. And really, it depends on the nature of the structure of your organization.
Well, and the structures are changing so quickly too. I mean, right, that's a challenge also.
Yeah, yeah. Things that have taken 5 years to do, now they have to be done in 5 weeks.
5 days. So
5 days sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. What are some of the high-risk factual scenarios which can be headed off by aggregating the data of several factories / clients at the same time? Can David give a concrete real-world example? Would it be something like a water shortage or impact of a logistical bottleneck on delivery times?
Yeah, so several things, right? So let's look at performance risk as an example, right? You have multiple clients that are working with one facility. There are multiple touch points that are happening across the production process. You are doing a verification of product pre-production, you're doing it during production, you're doing it after production. Now you're capturing so much data that with powerful machine learning models, you can understand what are the different points of information that correlate the most to a factory being high risk or low risk, or what it means, a inspection failing or not failing, right? Or if I place production here, there's going to be a much higher chance that I'm going to have quality problems. Now, once you understand those data points and the correlation to risk, you can then start having that machine learning model tell you whenever there's going to be a new activity that needs to be placed, right? Is it really worth it that I send people to verify if the risk is really low, or do I need to send my team to verify if the risk is really high? Then the answer is going to be yes, right? So again, many decisions of risk have been done by people that have worked in the industry for 20, 30 years that have subjective understandings of what are the highest correlations of risk. Data doesn't lie. And when you're looking at 3, 4, 5 years of data, thousands of different data points from millions of activities, you start recognizing very strongly what are those attributes that contribute to risk. And when you have that machine learning model built in, then you base your decisions on that, not on subjectivity or calculator answers, but on objective, trustworthy, accurate information. And today, if you're going to be thinking about where am I going to place new orders and what's the quality risk of those orders or my sustainability risk of those orders, you know, you would feel a lot better making your decisions and investing that shortened budget that you have on an accurate representation of risk rather than a subjective one.
That's a great point. All right, so does Inspectorio have real-time production monitoring in the factories? And by real-time, I mean real-time, i.e. would factories install RFIDs to track bundles or some other way?
Yeah, so what's interesting is we've been working on a solution of real-time production tracking, right? Normally in the industry, it's called an MES solution, right? And there has been some important, you know, apparel manufacturing groups and others that have adapted or adopted this. I think we're still at very early stages and it's becoming ever more relevant. Now, here's our view, and that is that, yes, that is important. And yes, today in the current situation, understanding exactly what's the status of your production will allow you to make a decision of what I can stop and what not. But reality is, going back to the pipeline, if you cut the beginning of your pipeline because consumers are buying less, and you have an inventory that's going up and you have products that are on the water moving forward, what the system tells you to your vendors and factories is stop sending me, stop shipping, stop producing. And in the last couple of years, factories have invested a lot of money in ramping up production. And that's why an MES solution and production tracking became so important, because you need to focus on efficiencies. Efficiency right now is not going to be on top of the priority in this new reality, as actually factories are starting to remove and reduce a lot of their installed capacity. I lived that in the past when, you know, many years ago when we worked in sourcing, we had a boutique sourcing company in 2008, you know, we were in factories and we saw these massive investments in production capacity that's starting being reduced. Now, if I go today to these factories that have been removing a lot of their production capacity and offering them a solution to bring greater efficiency, they're going to slap me in the face. And we've been talking to a lot of vendors, right? We have a vendor council, and you know, they work very closely with us on building this production tracking solution. And they told us themselves, right now, it's not a priority. It will be eventually, but right now it's not. Yeah.
Yeah, priorities are changing by the day. And actually, this is, I really appreciate this question. What about small and medium enterprises that are suppliers but do not necessarily have the financial to absorb the punch? What recommendations can you provide to this segment? It's a great question.
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think there are several ways that it could, you know, you can go about that. Number one is, as a company yourself, are you in a position to be able to sit down with those vendors and factories, understand your current financial situation, their current financial situation, and negotiate, you know, payment terms, extend those payment terms, renegotiate a lot of the conditions in which you're doing business, right? How you treat your suppliers today, again, is going to dictate how you're going to be, you know, keeping or maintaining that relationship moving forward and your reputation as a company. So of course, it depends on the reality of each, but number one is sit down with them, explain to them and communicate clearly and transparently, and see how you can together work on this. And then of course, there are other countries that have the capability of having broader stimulus from the government, and not every country is the same. So I wouldn't, you know, depend on that. I think it's more of standing strong to your commitment, standing strong to your values, and really focus on building those strategic relationships and work with them on trying to understand how to mitigate the challenges of this.
Okay, two more questions. It seems that the COVID-19 pandemic will not affect the corporate supply chain strategy fundamentally. Example, focus on digitization and differing stance on sustainability, et cetera. Do you agree?
I disagree. Wow. Well, the question was that it will not change, right? And I think that what will change is that it will have to be done a lot faster.
Yeah,
So
speed.
that will
But
not be removed from the agenda. Go ahead.
we've been working to speed, and I actually think that the challenge has been that everyone defines speed differently. I mean, I haven't heard, right? I mean, you know, we all look at it from a different perspective, which is actually why I think this is such a great question, because you know, the effect, yes, we all need to speed up, but what does that really mean, and how do companies do that, right? Especially when they're
Yeah.
all still working on scraps of paper.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? So one, it's you need to recognize that you need to do it quickly, but at the same time, you need to do it right. And if before, when digitization was what everybody talked about, they were not answering themselves the right questions of what are we digitizing for, now is the time to ask yourself those right questions. And look at what leading brands and retailers are doing. Take a look at those that have been less impacted and try and understand what have they done in terms of their digitization journey to make them successful today, and that will make them even stronger tomorrow. Right? Everybody likes to look at case studies and look at other trends in the industry. Well, there are very good examples, right? So I think that speed is one, and then asking yourselves the right questions, understanding it's a journey, and have the buy-in internally, set the right expectations.
Well, do you find along those lines with your vendor council, and I'm not sure who sits on that, but do you find that the larger companies and maybe those who are weathering the storm a little bit better, are they kind of providing, you know, kind of much needed support, and that could just be advice to some of these small, you know, SMEs, or how is that working, or is that just an opportunity for your vendor council to kind of, you know, provide some of that support?
Yeah, well, I think we need to be very careful on, you know, you're in the emergency phase, right? People need to focus on taking very quick, important emergency action. So time is of essence, and time is very precious. So we've also been very careful to not engage and bother, but rather engage in a way that is helpful and practical. So our stance has been, how can we help? And with that, it's been a couple of things. Number one is, you know, how can I continue shipping, and how can I continue shipping more effectively for those that, of course, still have the orders that are stuck that need to be shipping. And that's why we've seen such a resurge of self-inspections, because it's the vendor council that has come to us and said, you know how you can help? I need, you know, 20 more users to be doing these remote verifications. All of my clients are asking me to do these remote verifications myself, and I need to send them the report immediately, and I need to do this effectively. I need to provide them the visibility and the transparency. I need 30 more users, 50 more users, right? So they're recognizing that the brands and retailers need this. And what that says to you is something very powerful, which is how this relationship between suppliers, factories, and brands and retailers will take shape will be dictated mainly by the brands and retailers, right? How will brands and retailers rebuild that new normal and act in that new normal will define the relationships with their suppliers and their factories. If they've been talking about accountability, this is the true test. If they've been talking about empowerment, this is the true test. What suppliers want is to, of course, meet those expectations. And right now, those expectations is, I need you to do these verifications yourself, and we're here to help them do that.
Right. All right. Another question. How does a company that provides mobile handsets for in-store omni-channel, as well as for RFID tracking shipments, play in this new normal? Could they see a net negative or a net positive?
I think that all aspects of visibility in the supply chain are more relevant today than ever before. So if you're a company that provides a, you know, visibility into what's happening at the store through RFID, I think it is relevant, and I think it will be ever more relevant, right? Because again, today, if you're going to be sitting down with your vendors and factories to make them understand the reality and the impact that you've undergone today, that level of visibility and explanation needs to go end to end, from the store to your inventory to your everywhere, right? So I do see that being ever more relevant for sure. Again, going back to the question of getting access to information to be able to act quickly and make decisions quickly.
Okay, I promise this is the last question. When is the new digitalization platform going to be ready?
So our platform is ready. We've actually been promoting, facilitating and accelerating remote verification for years. That's what we have been building since our foundation. in a way that it's built as a network, right? Taking into consideration this interconnectedness, making the data relevant, bringing automation to reduce your costs. So we are in a position where right now that's our strongest focus, which is what we've built for years and what we've helped brands and retailers, the leading ones in the world, use. And we have helped, again, that acceleration and that facilitation of that. So we are going to be sending a lot of resources independent of our platform, just in general, right? If we know that the new normal is one about remote verification, we want to provide you the learnings from these last 3 years of doing that so that you can do it yourself. So next week, we're going to be releasing guidelines, step-by-step guides on how to start remote verifications. You can download the ebooks. We're putting a lot of resources out there. And then, of course, if you want to adapt or adopt a platform, come talk to us. Again, we've been doing this for many, many years, and the product has been evolving continuously. Yeah, we pride ourselves in that.
Great. So David, thank you so much. For those of you, once again, in 24 hours, we'll have this video up and running. It'll be under Coresight.com events, digital events library. We'll also send you out a transcript. And David, thank you. This was amazing. And first of all, we really appreciate you during this challenging time, taking time out from your busy schedule to join us. And also thank you for all that you're doing for the industry. We really appreciate it and really respect all that Inspectorio has done.
No, thank you, Deborah. Same to you, right? You're bringing important information for everybody else to make important decisions. So thank you for organizing this. Thank you for always being at the center of leading the industry forward, and always a pleasure. Anything we can do to help, questions that anybody in the audience have, please visit our website. We have a COVID-19 resources page where we post a lot of updates and a lot of resources, and just shoot us an email and we'll be happy to help. Thank you.
Great. Thanks again. Thanks, everyone.